Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. Today is the ninth day of October 2024. It's been a while since I've done actually a live video. Um, just simply as I've been under the weather, also dealing with a hurricane that came through here where I live at, and naturally no power. That was a big issue also here in the southeast of the United States. So my talk today will be simply how the Soviets took control of Russia by using the peasants 100 years ago, but also the signs of what's happening today in modern America. Um, the political correct, if that's a good word today, this has been going on for nearly 30 years, how they destroyed free speech in this country. Used it simply as to use the word hate speech in order to keep you from speaking out about what's going on. And so the postmodern perspective, postmodernism, has had enormous effects upon our world. Uh, and I've listened to some of the talks by Jordan Peterson in the past, but most of my information will come back from my days in studying Russian history. And when I took that in college back in the early 80s. So at that point, simply, there was already a changing of the guard, so to speak, even when I was in college and taking these courses. Most of my, let's see, 2 out of 3 of my political science teachers were older. They'd been there for a while, as far as I know of. And then there was a one brand new professor that came in the year that I entered um, uh, college there in 1978. So the two were older, and the one from University of North Carolina graduated there. Anyway, the point simply is that I got pretty much a dose of all this. Political science professors there. I had the freedom always to go in and meet. Usually, it was by schedule that I would meet with a professor, which is unheard of in a large university, which is what the advantages of being in a small school or a small university, because you can actually talk to the professor and say, I don't understand what this means here. And I'm trying to figure it out. Can you explain it to me more in detail of what I don't understand? Or I didn't do well in my class, or such and such, or whatever. So how can I make up that or improve that, my grades, such and such? So you had that a relationship. You don't meet professors these days, folks. You don't. Not in major colleges. Not no way. They're writing books. They don't teach, which is a really unfortunate thing. So, but anyway, let's go back to the past, and let's just understand how the tool was used with the help of the United States bankers, that is, to help, such as the Warburgs, such as the other ones. Carnegie probably was involved in that, and others, to do an experiment, a social experiment, so to speak, and to overthrow a country, a legitimate country, a legitimate government at that time. And it was an experiment in a lot of ways. And so what took place is that you had 2 or 3 groups vying for power. You had the Rockefellers, the other bankers who were involved, Melton was probably another one, I'm guessing, off the top of my head, gave money to actually spread this quote unquote revolution. And it was there. Most of the people don't even are aware that even the British and American troops actually entered, got on Russia's own homeland under Woodrow Wilson, one of the worst presidents ever to live or even be on this planet, so to speak, along with both Roosevelts. But the point with Wilson simply is he was so caught up in his whole dream he couldn't even see what he was doing, how he was completely brainwashed himself, as though he was doing something that was going to benefit man instead of actually doing the opposite. That's why he eventually, after the 14 points were eliminated, that is, by his own country, the United States, which knew that this was not very good at that point, did not approve of his 14 points, and that's why it didn't get approved for the League of Nations. And the United States went ahead with the approval of this. Then guess what? Um, that would have been the start of it. But this all ties in some ways because the United Nations was also a part of this later on. Aldra Hish, which was actually who was one of the people who actually was involved in the United Nations, which most people can't seem to connect that with with the United Nations. It's just a way of quote unquote giving away your power to a so-called world body, which is not a world body at all. It's just people who have been approved by a certain group of people. You see, it's all contrived. It's an enormous manipulation of the people of this country and other countries who believe that somehow the United Nations, the whole point, and let's go back and look at this point here with the idea of the United States wanting to declare war during the war with Korea. And they had to get approval from the United Nations in order to fight. So our country at that point was no longer sovereign, period. Although you can go back even further, that is more proof of that we were not sovereign even then, back in the 1920s. And how the Federal Reserve, which is not an entity of the government, is a group of private bankers who have just simply come in and stolen everything. It's nothing but theft. So you had a group of people, you had the Bolsheviks, you had the Mensheviks, and you had another group also fighting in order to, quote unquote, to get power in order to take over. And eventually the Bolsheviks won. And they would set up what they call Soviets. And Soviets is like essentially a political group that is involved in all towns or communities. And so they set these up, and these peasants, along with controllers in some way, although these peasants were so go ho about the whole idea of setting up a new government as though they're going to do something great for their country. In reality, it's detrimental. They are completely used by the Soviets, completely. It was a way of actually eliminating the bourgeoisie. What is the bourgeoisie? They're simply the middle class. Okay, they were simply the middle class people who were shop owners or doctors, medical people. Your own guy who ran a hardware store in your town. That was a bullshit, not a bullshit. That's a bourgeoisie, which was simply a middle class, had a little bit more money and a little bit more prestige, and actually had a little bit more what we call control, running a small business, so to speak, which is basically small businesses, such and such. And so I could see the same thing going on with postmodernism today. For example, when I went to school and we were already being given what we call multiple choice questions during our days, even in high school. And even that was done somewhat in college, although that was less of that, although it still was prevalent. And when I went to seminary, there was very little of that. The seminary was more wanting to know what you knew about this particular thing that happened in the past. So you had to write out a whole 3 or 4 paragraphs or even half a page or a full page of what you knew about what this whole idea dealing with a religious principle or Christianity, so to speak, or church history, you see. So you would actually have an idea of what you knew, not a multiple choice idea, you see. And this is a part of the dumbing down. And now all of it's done, all of it's done on the computer. You don't no longer, you don't have a way of actually explaining what you know because you're not taught to know what you know. You're taught simply is to get the right answer, which is a joke, a fucking joke. Okay. And so this is where we've gone, and it's a little piece by piece, this country has completely come apart. So anyway, back to the whole idea of the Soviets and the peasants being used. They were used until they eliminated what we call the bourgeoisie to the point that simply is then their job was over with and they were eliminated. Is that the same thing that's going to happen today? Is what we're seeing as the postmodernist perspective, the neo-Marxists, which neo just simply means new Marxists. They adopted these French ideas back in the 60s, late 50s and early 60s, and came in and basically, in a way, simply came in and went to basically the colleges, the universities, to quote unquote infiltrate these people and to bring that down. They actually brainwashed the kids even back then. Hell no, such and such. Let's do away with Western Civ. It's got to go. No one wanted to. They didn't want to see. They wanted to throw away something that basically gave the history of where the West came from, which is part of Greece and Rome, and even in some ways, partially even going back a little bit further, even to Egypt. But the point simply is that what's taken place is that that's no longer taught anymore in colleges or universities. It's gone. You still have at that time when I was there. I don't know what it's like now. You have still now have back then was you had U.S. history, but you didn't have any Western Civ Club courses when I was in school. You didn't. I could take what I call individual classes. I could take, which I wish I'd taken what I call Chinese history, which was offered, and Russian history and German history, so to speak. And there was no classes even on the British history, although that was probably tied in with American history also, so to speak. But the point simply is that if you don't know where you came from, how in the world are you going to know where you're going? If you don't have a solid foundation of where you came from, how can you actually go back to it? Because the memory's gone, folks. I'm 64 years old. I can talk to people who are my age and they don't know squat. They don't know nothing. Even though they quote unquote graduated from school, they also went to college and basically they went in other areas to quote unquote make money. Their whole idea perspective pursuit was to go in to do something else, either be a nurse or to be a teacher, so to speak, or either be uh, a businessman as they were teaching business administration back in the 90s, or whatever you want to call it. So they never got what I call, again, what I call the basics and principles of why you're free. They just take this for granted, people do. So what's happening today with the postmodernist perspective and all that, they want to, which they are doing it right now, and they've been doing it for 25 to 30 years, blatantly out in public. And it's very blatant now. And everything is so contoured to being simple. When I wrote papers, we didn't have anything such as a computer, which that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. It's not the issue. The issue simply is that they no longer have what I call journals that are printed. They're actually on computers, which makes it easier to get to. I see that. But I also know simply it's easier to quote unquote be eliminated. You see. And the modern perspective scary is that simply the elimination of books. Well, we don't need books anymore. It's all on computers. Well, yeah, that's an interesting perspective. It saves space and such and such. But the point simply is all you got to do is wipe out all the information on a computer and it's gone. You can just eliminate it. And the only people who have anything of that knowledge would be only ones who had some type of a personal library talking about these things, who dealt with this, you see. And so what I'm seeing here is enormously very straightforward how this country is being destroyed, and it's open right in front of your face. You have to be completely blind to see what's going on, and it's sad in some ways because your freedoms are dependent upon your knowledge of your own history of your Western civilization or what the West was about your own country. If you no longer know where you come from, where are you going to go to? You just follow whoever tells you something nice, and you say, "Well, that sounds good. I'll follow that." So you're no longer in control of your own destiny. You see, your own destiny. And so what's happening simply, these so-called liberal postmodernist political correct, which simply is that you don't have freedom of speech because you don't agree with our perspective. That's all bullshit. You see, it's a lie. It's a clever lie. So you no longer have what we call a place where you have the meeting of minds and let's discuss this and talk about it, which is what Jordan Peterson does. He is not afraid to go into that arena and talk about it. Actually, he's gone to college campuses since he's no longer, as far as I know, he's no longer a professor in the Canadian university he once was. So he's now taking his battle out into the open and say, I'll go on campus, or I'll go here, such and such. I'll meet somewhere else. And now he's done what I would call, he's now gone into the on computer. He has his now whole such, he's talking about Western Civ or Western philosophy, such and such, which is what it needs to be done in order to educate people and understand what's going on here, you see. Your country, the United States, my country, is so dependent upon foreigners now, it's ridiculous. This has been happening the last 40, 50 years. Our greatest, probably highest mark was basically probably in the mid-60s, and that's it. And it's been on a downward slope ever since then. And what that means simply is that doesn't mean you don't have opportunities for good jobs, but the point simply is that it's the weeding down, so to speak. And it becomes less and less people who understand anything. And people watch their news on the media, on the television, which is squat. It's just shit. It's just taught. There's nothing there. Same way with your elections. The elections changed back in the 1950s in America because it began to be televised. You see, so televised. You see, in the past you had the conventions that took place, the Republicans and Democrats, when they had convictions, and that was kept in a closed capture, only those who were involved in that. They didn't have the media get involved. This is the whole idea. The media has to get involved in all these things. And what happens is when they do that, they dumb it down. Unless you know how the process works, you're dumbed down. You don't have any idea. And most people are bored by it, so they don't even pay. They don't even watch it. I'm just giving you an idea. But the media comes in simply is, and they actually superficially show these things, try to explain these things. Unless someone's actually knows this, they're also fooled, you see. And so it's just what I would call a popularization of democracy, which in reality, democracy is simply mob rule. Okay, whoever's got 50.1% over the 49.9% is the mob. It's the mob rule, you see, and which there should be what I call many political parties that are actually at stake and fight for things. But that's been it's been enormously, people have been so brainwashed to the point simply is to vote for either or, the less of the two evils. Well, they're both evil, folks. What the fuck are you doing? I mean, people are just so stupid. They just simply choose something. It would be better if you don't even vote. It's actually best you don't vote. Because when you vote, you're giving the consent of your vote, your consent to them ruling over you. It's that simple. You are actually given an opportunity, but you have only twiddly-dee and twiddly-dum, as we used to call it in political science. And that's all it is. There isn't much difference between the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. There isn't. Their rhetoric is bullshit. They say something, but it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean squat. And neither candidates are worth voting for these days anyway. Both of them. But people will choose because simply they say, "Well, I voted. That means I'm a citizen, such and such." Da, da, da. No. That's how people have been so brainwashed. But it's taken over 100 years to do that. You see. And so when you think about what America did with their industrialist bankers and all that, most people are unaware that during World War II, during the World War II, the U.S. went, Ford Motor Company went to Germany. Went to the Soviet Union and built factories behind the Ural Mountains in order to, quote unquote, to build them up to the point so they could, so to speak, fight the Germans and to defeat the Germans. And no one ever contests this. I know what people say about the whole thing here about the Germans and the Russians, such and such. They were bad people, such and such. When I don't say Russians, I should say communists, because they wasn't Russian. Most of them were not Russians. They're mostly other groups. And the communists, the United States, why do we ally ourselves with the communists of Russia, of the Soviet Union? Why do we do that? Makes no sense, does it? Well, we had to have another front to fight them, such and such. We needed them. Really? Did we really need them? Or is this a cop out, you see? Because eventually the whole idea, when the war is being almost won by the West, the idea becomes simply is that the Soviet Union begins to draw up and they want these certain countries. Those were the countries of what we call the Warsaw Pact. And our leadership was appeasing. They just simply let them have it. That was countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Romania, and others, Serbia, Slovakia, all those small countries such and such, which was a buffer zone, which is another thing we need to talk about sometime. But anyway, I don't want to go a whole lot. This my whole thing, again, was to talk about how people today don't realize the revolution is already taking place and it's been going on for a while. It's not what you call a fast revolution like sort of the in the 1917 when they had a revolution in 1905. It failed to take over. And it was another revolution that took place before 1917. And finally, and even had one earlier in February of that year, 17, and it failed. And eventually in November, I think it was in 1917, they came to power. All by design to weaken the people, also to weary them to continue to fight against this whole thing. You see, people will do anything for money. They'll sell out their own neighbors a lot of times when they're hungry, you see. So my point simply is very clear. The postmodernists, neo-Marxists that are basically now taken over and are just completely mob-like are just following a program that they've been taught. They themselves know nothing. They think they're actually spreading freedom when actually they're spreading the opposite of that. Okay, the young people know nothing because they're brainwashed. There are some that know something, but the majority, if not majority, probably 90% of them are completely fooled. You see. And so what's transpiring these days is to do with the same history repeats itself, you see. And if you're not wise enough to realize what the signs are and what's taking place, then guess what? You will fall just like others have fallen in the past. And kingdoms rise, kingdoms fall, so to speak. So this is what's happened. And people forget. People don't remember how great this country once was. Yes, we didn't have perfect leadership even back in the 1700s, so to speak. Yes, we didn't have great leadership in the 1800s, especially in the mid 1800s when we eventually get involved in fighting one another, you see. But they seem to simply, people can't seem to connect the dots at all, or don't want to put the time in. It's basically what it is. Because people are too busy nowadays, quote unquote, trying to put food on the table. And now it's so bad that too many people have to work 2 to 3 jobs in order to put food on the table. That's how bad it is in this country. It's how lousy our government is in many ways. It's gotten so big, it's just a giant eating machine of stealing everything from everybody, you see. So just a warning to those out there. Again, this is just a generalization, but it's also pertinent to understand that this country itself is in a mess. And it's because people don't understand Western civilization. They don't understand where their beginnings were. They don't understand a lot of this comes from the Greeks. It comes from the Romans, such and such. They don't understand that. And the great people most people don't understand, they belittle the Freemasons and say they're really bad people. But most of the leaders of our country at that time were Freemasons, you see. But yet we have a problem of simply associating with Masons as being always bad. but that may not be always true, is it? You know, and one thing was simply is if you can keep it. In other words, you want to be free, you have to be vigilant to keep it. You just can't give it to someone and say, "Here, take care of it." You see, because you don't know his heart or his mind and what he's trying to do, especially the politicians these days. Why do you think, for example, why do you think all these politicians have to have millions and millions of dollars to quote unquote, run for office if you're going to get paid for only $200,000 or $300,000? That makes no sense. Well, it does make sense because you get all the freebies and all kinds of other things that goes on with these people in the Senate and the House. That's why none of them actually even represent people anymore. They represent themselves. That's how bad it is out here. All right. Thank you for listening. I didn't want to go too much longer than that. Thank you for listening. Have a good day. Talk to you soon. Again, this was about how the Soviets took control of Russia by using the peasants at that time, and how today it's the same thing. So it's basically what we call neo-Marxist or postmodernist thinking that is destroyed. And the sad part simply is that Jordan Peterson points out one thing. The postmodernism came from the French philosophers who came in and have done that. They love communism so much. You see, this is what's happened simply is we've supposedly fought to eliminate communism, but now we have communism all over the place. So you see. Anyway, thank you. Take care. Have a good day.